This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.
Over the past few weeks, we've been breaking down the history, subtext, and evolving meanings of the buzzwords you hear all over the news and social media. This is the ABCs of the culture wars. Our final word is F, for fascism.
We don't have a lot of terms in American society that are kind of cross-political, cross-cultural. Fascism is one of them.
That's Professor Nicholas Ensley Mitchell. He teaches education theory, policy, and practice at the University of Kansas. And he's right. You hear this word all over the political spectrum. From the press account of California Governor Gavin Newsom calling Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller a fascist, in all caps, on X, to then presidential nominee Donald Trump calling former Vice President Kamala Harris a fascist.
She's a Marxist, communist, fascist.
So how do we make sense of the word fascist being thrown around like this? Well, Professor Mitchell has been writing about the history of the word, and he's offering a perspective that I haven't really heard in mainstream conversations about fascism.
So I think we can talk about this really as just a meme, in the sense that we talk about other memes on the internet. Mm-hmm. Fascism, it's a succinct way of talking about an oppressive cultural regime or government or even vibe.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's not just being used in a political context. Like, I've seen people accuse some influencers of quote unquote body fascism when they talk about weight loss and body image. It shows up in a lot of different parts of American discourse.
And the reason for that is really tied up in American history. I mean, going really back into the Second World War, which is this conflict that just defines America.
What Professor Mitchell means is that modern American identity was crystallized in opposition to fascism. I mean, if you grew up in the American school system, I'm sure you can see the image right now of American soldiers heroically going to Europe to fight the Nazis in World War II.
Never before has there been a greater challenge to life, liberty, and civilization.
They were fighting against fascism, against an ideology seen as counter to the American ideals of freedom and democracy.
We believe that the Nazis and the fascists have asked for it, and they're going to get it.
Fascism is explicitly authoritarian. It is chauvinistic. It is sexist, and it is ultra-nationalistic and racist. Mm-hmm. It's very obsessed with us and them. It's not just government. It's a full cultural movement. It is obsessed with aesthetics, how people dress, how people talk, symbols on buildings, the layout of cities, ghettos versus where everybody else could go.
Other scholars define fascism as a dictatorship with enthusiastic public support, and say that fascism can develop in a democracy when the people start to feel their leader doesn't have enough power to avert a perceived national crisis. And, these definitions might stir a feeling in you right now. But there's an important difference between feeling that something is fascist and a formal system of fascism.
In a democratic, pluralistic society, meaning is determined by individuals. And we determine meaning for ourselves. In a fascist society, meaning is determined by the state. They tell you what the history means. They tell you what everything means.
And in Professor Mitchell's essay titled, "Want to Learn How to Respond to Fascism? Study Black History," he lays out why he thinks American history showcases this country's much older relationship with fascism, long before Nazism and World War II.
Fascists are always concerned with, let's have this mythic past so then we can control who we are and say who belongs and who doesn't belong and whose grievances and histories are real and whose are just complaining. In my experience, they all try to go for a very sanitized history rather than what I call the messy truth.
Today, we're getting into why Professor Mitchell thinks this country needs to deal with what he calls its own fascist past.
And that's the messy truth of American history. It's a lot of contradictions.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. You know, we're going to get into the exact polling in a second, but a big headline from the past year is that a majority of Americans, particularly Democratic voters, have said that they see Trump as a fascist or dictator-like. I mean, if you did a quick search right now, you can find think piece on think piece arguing, you know, whether the country is sliding into fascism. I know a lot of people have concerns about our current moment, but is fascism the right descriptor for it?
Oh, that's a huge question.
Sorry to lay that on you.
Well, I mean, it is not surprising to me that people use that term because this term has been used various ways. I mean, of course, Nixon was called a fascist. Reagan was called a fascist. Obama was called a fascist for the Affordable Care Act. But also during the, in the War on Terror, the term Islamic fascism was so common.
Right.
And that happens exactly when social media is starting to take off. That's early Facebook, later early Twitter, or X now.
Well, to kind of think in terms of today, a widely talked about poll from October 2024, taken right before the presidential election, found that 49% of Americans identified Trump as a fascist. To your point about this being a political meme, 22% also described Vice President Harris as a fascist. Now, in April of this year, in another poll, 41% of Americans strongly defined Trump as a, quote, dangerous dictator, compared with 27% who strongly defined him as a, quote, strong leader who should be given power to restore America's greatness. What do these snapshots say about the state of this country?
For the past 25 years, we have been in this really intense cultural battle over who are we and who do we want to be. And we've had so much dynamic change in the past 25 years from, Bush, 9/11, War on Terror, and then you get the first black president. And then, Trump from completely outside of the political world, he comes in, and then that brings this own sort of upheaval. Me personally, I think that when historians look back on this era, we're going to look at kind of like the twin poles of the change of whatever comes after this. It's going to be Obama and Trump.
Yeah. And they also represent, they even just in the popular imagination, they represent in some ways things that can feel very polar opposite to many people, and they are side by side.
And who gets to have power? And who gets Obama, this, and not just for him being him being African American, he's an academic, he's very new to politics. And then you have Trump. Trump is a businessman, and he was a media figure, very kind of pop cultural figure. Of course, both of these aren't the first academic president, and Trump's
or
not
the first like celebrity president either. Yeah.
So with all that change and all that clash, it does not surprise me that people were out there calling Obama a fascist, and it does not surprise me that people are calling Trump a fascist, because that meme is our stand-in for there's a lot of change, and it's scaring some people.
So is kind of calling President Trump fascist, is this just like political name calling, or something adjacent to that may need some more teasing out?
I think it's the second one. We're grappling. I think Americans are grappling with how to make sense of a lot of this. So there's one really key fact that I think is relevant to any discussion about Trump. And I don't know why more people don't talk about it. Every single one of Donald Trump's electoral coalitions was multiracial. It was multi-class. It was multi-ethnic. Multiracial fascism is not something that happens.
I mean, I know what you're saying is true. We have reported on these things on this show before. But pulling just that fact out for a second and looking at it, it's like it feels like you hit reset on my brain.
Trump didn't just have one multiracial coalition. He had three.
Yeah.
In the third election, he picks up a third of the non-white vote. You can't ignore that in any of these conversations. But a lot of people do.
Yeah. I guess maybe part of what you're saying then is that fascism doesn't quite fit as a descriptor because Trump has a diverse coalition backing him. And that, the idea of a multiracial coalition doesn't really fit with the definitions of fascism. And maybe that there's a different word that might fit better.
So it's like, when you put it all together, what does this say about who we are? And into that uncertainty, that's where you're going to see fascism get a lot of track in the popular culture as a mean for describing what they're seeing.
Coming up, the words Professor Mitchell thinks define this moment. Stay with us.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Pete and Jerry's Eggs, inviting you to tag along with one of their organic pasture-raised hens as she heads out for her day in the pasture. She and her friends start to roam and forage, hunting for tasty organic snacks. And with 108 square feet per hen, there's plenty of space for everyone. Under the open sky, they can hear songbirds nesting in the trees. They bask in the sounds of nature as they prepare to lay their rich, delicious eggs. And when the sun starts to set, the crickets begin to sing. Time to catch one last squiggly snack before bedtime. To learn more about Pete and Jerry's organic pasture-raised eggs and the certified humane farms where their hens roam, visit peteandjerrys.com.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no hidden fees. Plans start at $15 a month. Make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. That's mintmobile.com/switch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required. Equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. This message is sponsored by DSW, the birthplace of the humble brag. Full of all kinds of shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. And when there are never-ending options for every style, mood, occasion, and budget, there is unlimited freedom to play. And that's something to brag about. So go ahead, stock up on fresh sneakers from your favorite brands. Or try those boots you always secretly knew you could pull off. Find the shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. DSW, let them surprise you.
Thinking about fascism again and in the broader sense, not just in the way that people are maybe using it to describe a swift political change that feels wrong to them. Many Americans think of fascism as something very un-American, not just like against American values, but more specifically something that has happened before in history, but never here. But you argue that America has a strong history of fascism in Jim Crow and in American segregation. Tell me more about that.
Sure. We have this interesting and very impoverished view of Jim Crow. We'll talk about it as, it was separate water fountains and separate schools. No, it was that, but it was also ghettoizing people. It was brutalizing them. It was state-sanctioned murder and terrorism. You get events like Red Summer, where you have nationwide race riots. And then, of course, you get probably, the most famous of those being the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. If I put those sorts of things in a European context, we would call those pogroms.
Yeah. For those who don't know, pogroms were violent attacks or riots targeting Jewish people by both Russians and Germans in the 19th and early 20th century.
So you have these parallels between what's happening with Jewish people and minorities in Nazi Germany and in Europe and what's happening in the United States. It's the sort of thing that inspires the Nazis. The Nazis are looking at American eugenics for inspiration for their own murderous eugenics programs.
And just to lay out our timeline here, the Jim Crow period in the United States was from 1877 to around the 1950s. Nazism and its eugenics program really took off in the 1930s when Jim Crow laws were still in effect.
You know, there's a great book, Hitler's American Model, that gets into how much the anti-Semitic laws were directly inspired by the Jim Crow laws. And they have one of the big justices, rather, of the Nazi regime saying in the book, and it's me paraphrasing, this set of laws is great for us. The only problem is that it considers Jewish people to be white.
I mean, I think, some people might argue that Jim Crow isn't exactly quote unquote fascism, but in your view, why do you think it's important to frame Jim Crow like this?
When you think of Jim Crow as fascism, then that makes Black history and the resistance to Jim Crow an example of how do you fight fascism. We have this image of the civil rights movement that, you get the bus boycotts. Rosa Parks is tired, so she won't give up her seat.
Right.
Martin Luther King gives a speech where he just talks about the content of character.
Right.
Versus what it actually was in many regards, and honestly how segregationists saw it, that it was a revolt. Black people have been calling, we have been talking about fascism in the 30s. Langston Hughes, he says in 1937, we Negroes in America do not have to be told what fascism is. We know.
So even the conversation we are having right now is not new. It's
about 100 years old. I want to say, Du Bois linked Jim Crow and fascism and like imperialism. But I think the big takeaway for me when I was talking about understanding Jim Crow as a form of fascism and why is that important, it's because in America, we have this view of American democracy as these ancient pillars driven into the ground. But if you're going to be bluntly honest, can you call yourself a democracy if a bunch of your people can't vote because of the color of their skin?
It's a fair question.
Or because of their sex? So to me, and I agree with the scholars who argue this, that America doesn't become a liberal democracy until 1965.
When the Voting Rights Act
is passed. So then in that sense, American liberal democracy is very fragile. It's new. Black people and non-white people, and also white people across the political spectrum they're down with this. They're down with the civil rights movement. So conservative, liberal, all of that. They joined this revolt to overthrow this system. It's a multiracial creation. It's a multi-ethnic creation. It's a multi-political creation. Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives and progressives all had hands in creating this thing.
For people who are seeing the continued stripping of the Voting Rights Act, for people who are thinking about the fact that most Americans support legalized access to abortion. And now that's something that's not guaranteed by our Constitution anymore.
Yeah.
Many people feel like their rights are being stripped away. And I understand where you're coming from, where you say multiracial fascism is not a thing. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the proper term. But I'm trying to think about people who are going to be listening who might think, okay, well, if that's not fascism, then what is? What's a better descriptor? What's a better way to name this?
Cultural upheaval. I think we are in a period of intense cultural upheaval where the entire social contract is being relitigated.
I mean, I'll say, when you say cultural upheaval, that phrase is so neutral. and I think that that makes sense. But I will say that when you say that to me, I understand why some people, regardless of where they are in the political spectrum, would reach for fascism. Because social upheaval, it doesn't satisfy the feeling of fear and discomfort that I think many people feel when these big moments of change are happening.
I would agree. And I think that's why you see this term get used so much. I think being afraid and being anxious, that is a normal reaction. That is not people overreacting. Because that is the environment into which, European fascism emerged. But also, it's the environment that the civil rights movement really worked its power to force America to be a democracy. That is the actual outcome of the civil rights movement. I use the term cultural upheaval because these are tectonic shifts happening, in the culture. And really the question is, what's going to happen? How are people going to react? Because the government does not have the ability to just renegotiate the social contract. The entire culture is going to do that.
I have one last question. I mean, even in the absence of total, consensus regarding the characterization of our current political moment, because there are lots of people who feel like the country is moving in the right direction. What are people trying to point out or say when they return to the term fascism? What are they really trying to say?
Danger. Fascism as a meme, it is closely synonymous with danger. There is a threat, and it's an active threat. Because whenever you call someone a fascist, or you call a group a fascist, you are not just saying that as a simple category of, oh, they just exist. No, these guys are trying to take something away from you. They're trying to repress you. So it's a recognition of there is danger and it's coming after me. It's a ingrained alarm in American culture. And, I think despite all the changes and how it's been used in American history, it retains that sense of urgency, that this is not something to sleep on.
Well, Nicholas, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with me today. I really, really got so much out of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was Professor Nicholas Ansley Mitchell. He teaches education theory, policy, and practice at the University of Kansas. And I'm going to put on my influencer hat for a second and ask you to please subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening. Click follow so you know the latest in culture while it's still hot. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Alexis Williams,
Barton Girdwood.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Pete and Jerry's Eggs, inviting you to tag along with one of their organic pasture-raised hens as she heads out for her day in the pasture. She and her friends start to roam and forage, hunting for tasty organic snacks. And with 108 square feet per hen, there's plenty of space for everyone. Under the open sky, they can hear songbirds nesting in the trees. They bask in the sounds of nature as they prepare to lay their rich, delicious eggs. And when the sun starts to set, the crickets begin to sing. Time to catch one last squiggly snack before bedtime. To learn more about Pete and Jerry's organic pasture-raised eggs and the certified humane farms where their hens roam, visit peteandjerrys.com.